Third reason why we should bother about personal investment is to protect yourself from financial advisors and the financial media. This is a concept not understood by many. I'm going to spend quite a bit of time on this. When you want to invest, you will come face to face with what is called the financial services industry. The financial services industry is there to make profits for itself first. In the bargain, if you happen to make some money, fine. If you happen to lose money, as happens very often, the financial services industry is not bothered about it. This is something that is probably the most important lesson that you can ever learn. You have to beware of people in financial services. They call themselves advisors, they call themselves professionals, they are neither. How do you understand what the games that are being played in the financial services industry? The first thing is this one important saying, which according to me, every investor must get by heart and repeat every morning. Never expect an investment advisor to take greater interest in your money than you yourself have a duty to take. Never do that. Why? The money is yours. Therefore, the responsibility is yours. When the money is yours, it is up to you to see that it is correctly invested. People do foolish things, then come running to people like us saying, I've lost money. Somebody has cheated me. Very often I tell them quite mercilessly, sorry, nobody has cheated you. You have cheated yourself. There are other people that, but who is to blame for my losses? I say, you are to blame. Start there. That's the starting point. I have done something foolish. First, accept it. I have done something foolish. There's a price to pay. I want to be greedy. I want to be foolish with my money. But nothing bad should happen to me. Sorry, it doesn't work that way in real life. If we make mistakes, we will be paying. And things like the stock market can be a very merciless teacher. So we have to be very, very careful about this. Never expect an investment advisor to take greater interest in your money than you yourself have a duty to take. Burton Malkiel says, the primary interest of financial advisors is not yours, but theirs. They are very good at making money for themselves. This is something that we have to understand. And how do they do it? Warren Buffett tells us, there seems to be some perverse human characteristic that likes to make easy things difficult. Let me link this with something I said earlier. Finance and investment work at two levels, the macro level, the micro level. A good advisor will always tell you, don't get confused between the two. You are at the micro level. Very easy to gain knowledge. Anybody who is watching these kind of talks is there to gain that kind of knowledge. And I can assure you that regardless of your qualifications, you will pick up the knowledge. But a bad financial so-called advisor will make things complicated and tell you, you cannot do anything on your own. Finance and investment is not for people like you. It is very difficult, it's complicated. Leave it to us. So what they try to do is, they try to create a dependency. You are dependent upon me. A good advisor will try to educate. Why? He knows that an educated investor is a much better client than an uneducated investor. The person can discuss intelligently. The person can also throw up ideas. I improve myself as an advisor because I know that the person coming to me is not stupid. He is doing his study, his reading. I better be good also. Otherwise, I will cut a sorry figure. So it's actually a pleasure to have good, interested, intelligent students and also good, interested and intelligent, well-read, well-educated clients. This is what a good advisor does. It's a virtuous circle, not a vicious circle. I have learned a lot from my students as well as my clients. And why did I learn a lot? Because somewhere I inspired them a little bit to start reading and acquiring more and more knowledge. Because they kept reading, they got certain ideas, they started asking certain questions. One or two questions they asked which I could not answer. So that would propel me, or that would instigate me, provoke me rather, to go deeper into my own knowledge, to start finding answers to these questions. Warren Buffett says there seems to be some perverse human characteristic that likes to make easy things difficult. So whenever somebody tells you that investment is something difficult, ask them at which level. Are you talking about writing the union budget, or are you talking about a normal investor investing something? If it's at our level, sorry, we don't agree, it is easy. And by the time we are through with this series of talks, you'll have a very, very simple and effective framework to know how to invest effectively. Many people in the investment field call themselves professionals. We have to question right at the beginning, are they professionals? If you ask me how I would define a professional, every professional should have three attributes. The first is the highest possible standard of ethics. The second is the highest possible expertise. And third, a long-term commitment to quality practice. Ethics, expertise, long-term commitment. These are the hallmarks of any professional. We have seen people, stock market is booming, they are stockbrokers. Stock market crashes, office is closed. Let's say the cocoa or areca markets are booming. I'm there, I'm now an areca agent. That goes down, tomorrow gold is booming, I'm a jeweler. And they may call themselves professional, real estate professional, bullion professional, something else professional. Where is the long-term commitment? A good doctor will always remain a doctor, regardless of practice, regardless of competition, regardless of newer and newer doctors coming because of mushrooming medical colleges. Ethics, expertise, long-term commitment. Actually, ethics is probably the most important. The other two are not standalone, they are part of ethics. Why? Because ethics tells me that if I do not have the expertise, I should not be a professional. Ethics tells me that if I have no long-term commitment to quality practice, I should not be a professional. In one line, the first and most important qualification of a professional is ethics. This is not understood. This is not understood. Let's understand it better. It's very important. The best definition that I have come across about ethics is from a US Supreme Court justice called Potter Stewart. It's a beautiful saying. This is what he says. Ethics is knowing the difference between what you have a right to do and what is right to do. Knowing the difference between the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. This is ethics. It's knowing the difference between what I have a right. I have a lot of rights. But is what I am doing right? Somebody will sell you a stupid investment linked insurance policy. When the time comes to cash in, there are serious losses. You try to take some action, suddenly pages after pages of fine print will be thrown at you. Every page you have signed, your signature will be there. You can go to the consumer court, you will lose. You can go to the insurance ombudsman, you will lose. You will feel cheated, you will vow never to go anywhere close to an insurance agent or insurance company again. But in the process, you have suffered a loss. Just the other day, I accompanied a client of mine because she is an old lady in her late 60s. Let me make the story very simple. A total of 70,000 rupees was invested in a so-called insurance product. It was a ULIP. 70,000. 8 years have passed. And this particular lady kept the kept the policy until its maturity after 8 years. Why did she want me to come with her to the insurance company? Because she knew that when she goes there, they know that there are maturity proceeds coming. Immediately, they will make her put it into something else. So if you are with me, they will not do it. I said, okay, I'll come with you. So we went to the insurance company office. Only after going there and after finishing the formalities, we realized that there was no need for my presence. This lady would never have put a rupee there. You know why? 70,000 invested, 8 years have passed, what she is getting back is 48,000. She turns totally, shocked. I said, listen, luckily you have got enough other assets, because I know her whole case. Don't quarrel. You will only create more stress for yourself. The first thing they'll do is take your original form. But the agent says this, the agent says that. I said, where the insurance business is concerned, the agent is dead. Okay, otherwise you would not be calling me here. You would call the agent. Yes, he has got out of the business. After 2 or 3 years. You see this, no long-term commitment. And agent made a number of, false promises. And the lady took an insurance policy at the age of something like 60. At 68, this is the kind of loss. Forget returns. I have paid 70,000, I'm getting back 49,000 after 8 years. So these are the kind of things that are happening. I'll give you one more example. A leading ophthalmologist in this city, who is a client of mine, he was telling me a story. A person became his client, a patient. Some cataract surgeries, other things were performed. Then that person started slowly getting his family members whenever they had eye problem. And before long, some 10 to 12 patients had come through that one particular person. One day the person comes and says, doctor, I have given you so much of business. You have to buy one insurance policy from me. So the doctor said, see, listen, I don't want insurance, and somehow then out of obligation, it was taken. And the doctor is so busy. He might have paid the first premium, of course you have to pay, otherwise you don't get the policy. He might have paid 1 more year's premium. When the third time came to pay the third premium, he omitted to pay it, or he didn't receive his premium notice, or he was just too busy, because he is a genuinely busy doctor. Suddenly he started getting calls from the insurance company. No, you have to pay the premium, otherwise this will happen, that will happen. So the doctor said, hang on. When your agent came to take my premium the first time, the story he painted was very rosy. All these things of penalty and losing this and losing that, all those things were not told to me. All that we don't know, we are from the insurance company. In case you don't pay, XYZ will happen to you. So the doctor rings up the agent, whom he has not seen for some time. The agent is now actually shouting at the doctor. He says, what? Don't you know that I've given up this long back? Now it is between you and the company. It's your policy, not mine. The doctor was so shocked. He said, I didn't even know what to say. It is my policy. As if I went and grabbed it and bought it desperately. It is that chap who had come, persuaded me. I told him I don't want the policy, I don't want insurance. But still he said, take okay, out of some obligation, he is my patient. There have been other patients through him. I bought it. He is not there to service. No long-term commitment. Forget about ethics. So, what I am finding in the financial services industry, and this is not just in India, it is worldwide. Forget about there being no ethics. Nobody there knows the meaning of ethics. That's the starting point. Forget about not having ethics. Nobody knows its meaning. Everybody says ethics. Another doctor told me, in medical education, the kind of, sharp practices that are going on, right from the education stage upwards. But there is a chapter on ethics that the medical students are taught. In the management colleges, there are chapters on ethics. The moment they are out of it, that is only you have to get it by heart, reproduce it in the exam, you will get good marks. It is not internalized. It does not become a life lesson. Moment you are out of the college, all ethics is forgotten. Why? It was not learnt in the first place. What was given was some dry knowledge which we just learnt because we had to answer an exam, not because we placed any importance on ethics. That's why you can read 1,000 pages on ethics and not learn ethics. Sometimes one sentence like this may make you think a little bit. To conclude once again, the three essentials of a professional: ethics, expertise, a long-term commitment to quality practice. So these are very, very important when you talk about professions. Now let's look at the other side, which is equally important. We looked at what a professional should be, we looked at what ethics is. What should the relationship between a client and a professional be? Once again, let me give you an example. Somebody goes to a doctor. Moment he enters the doctor's chamber, he says, "Doctor, I am not feeling well." That's all. "I am not feeling well." Then the doctor asks, "What do you mean by not feeling well? Are you running a temperature? Do you have a respiratory problem? Is there any other?" Slowly the doctor has to extract information. Let's take another patient. The patient walks in and says, "Doctor, 2 days back I had a temperature. I took my reading, it was 100. There were no other symptoms. That night I took a paracetamol. Next morning I felt better, but once again I've had some temperature running. Once again no other symptoms, so I took another paracetamol. Third day I thought, no, the temperature still is there, I should see you. Here are my readings. I've taken temperature readings twice a day. I've noted them down. I've also taken the precaution of doing a malaria test. Here's the report. It's negative." The patient is giving a lot of information to the doctor. Immediately what does the doctor think? Here's somebody who's serious about his health. Here's somebody who's serious about presenting a case. Take somebody who goes to the lawyer and says, "I've got a problem with some neighbor or some other relation or somebody in business. Here are the papers." Papers will be totally jumbled, half filed, half not filed. No filing in any form, sort of order, whether date-wise, chronological or otherwise. Versus someone who prepares a small 1-page or 1.5-page note. Okay, I am in business. So and so owes me money. This is the contract on which he owes me money. Here is the document, here's the evidence of my having supplied some goods. Here's my bill. Here's evidence of his having received the bill. Signature is there. I have sent one registered letter after he did not pay. What do I do? All the evidence is mentioned there. A brief note is given, and in the note all the photocopies are enclosed. I have marked the numbers. Photocopy number 1 is the bill, photocopy number 2 is something else. Immediately the lawyer feels like reading it. Here is somebody who has taken the trouble. Many times we find people incapable of briefing a professional. It's sad. You do not know your own case. When you go to a lawyer, there are two aspects to any case. One is the facts, the second is the law. I don't mind if you don't know the law, but you don't know your facts. You can make a few bullet points, these are my facts, date-wise or something, this is how the whole thing unfolded. You supply good facts to the lawyer will very effectively apply the law. So the same thing can happen whether you are engaging an architect or a civil engineer, a doctor, a chartered accountant, anybody. How effective are we as clients? When we have a professional, do we leave everything to the professional? Are we totally powerless? We should not do anything, we cannot do anything. Or are there a few things we can do? And we will discover that there is quite a bit we can do. And many times we do not do this. So we have to understand the client-professional relationship is not one where I depend entirely on the professional. It is a partnership. It is a partnership. Please understand this. Somebody has specialized knowledge. I have a need for that specialized knowledge. It is incumbent upon me to do my best to get that specialized knowledge. For that, I have to prepare. I have to go prepared. I have to go keeping my papers in a logical sequence. I have to brief somebody correctly. Many times clients will come to us. They are simple tax matter they cannot explain to a chartered accountant. Finally, I say, okay, sit down. I quickly dictate a couple of paragraphs, address a letter to the CA and say, okay, just go and show this to the CA. The CA will understand. We should be well aware of our facts as clients of any profession. And then we should treat the relationship as not one of dependency, but as partnership. And this is true for all relationships. All relationships. It has to be a partnership. We can extend this in a different way, to even the concept of marriage in a married couple, because marriage itself is a partnership. But when I do my investment or financial advising or planning, the first question I ask is, the person who has come to me, are you married? If they say yes, how come you have not come with your spouse? They may give any excuse. Sometimes they do not want to know the spouse to be involved. Sometimes the spouse does not want to be involved. But I insist to the extent possible. I said, okay, your spouse says, your wife says she is not interested, no problem. Tell her to come with you. Let her just sit there. She will be asked no questions, she need not do anything, but let her sit there as we discuss. I just want her to sit there for one meeting. She'll never be called again. Second time she has to want to come. More than 90% of the cases, the spouse will want to come the next time. So this is very, very important. When two people work on it, especially in a husband and wife context, if two people work together on a financial plan, it's excellent. I've had students, unfortunate, either they have lost their father or their mother. But I've seen them absorbing this point and then appearing before me for a counseling session together, either a mother and son, mother and daughter, or father and son or father and daughter, they will come together. When a family works on it, it is much more, very much more effective. The better informed, interested and participative the client, the better will the expertise of the professional be exploited. So this is something that we have to understand. Burton Malkiel wrote a simplified version of his book, A Random Walk Down Wall Street, just 170 or 180 pages. And that book was called The Random Walk Guide to Investing, 10 Rules for Financial Success. In that he makes some basic points, and his first basic point was, fire your investment advisor. A lot of people could not understand this. Let us try to understand why, by looking at some normal types of so-called investment advisors. Let us take the insurance industry first. We know that from the last more than a decade, the insurance industry in India is privatized. Before that, where life insurance was concerned, you had only the LIC. And where general insurance was concerned, you had 4 general insurance companies, but they were all government owned, therefore clones of each other. And the people who used to sell policies, whether life insurance or general insurance, were called agents. Today, if you call them agents, it is almost insulting. Overnight, agents disappeared and they became advisors. But I would like to ask, are they really advisors? Who is an advisor? There is somebody who advises and somebody who is advised. The advisor is supposed to give advice in the interest of the advised. The difficulty is, even today, an individual agent is allowed to be an agent of only one life insurance company and one general insurance company. So supposing I am a agent of, let's say, SBI Life Insurance, and a 35-year-old person is asking me which is the best term life insurance policy available for a certain sum of money. And I know that SBI Life Insurance term policy annual premium is, let's say, 8,000 rupees for the sum that he wants. I also know that there are at least 3 to 4 leading companies whose quotations for a 35-year-old are less than 8,000 rupees per annum. I am an advisor. Will I tell the insured, no, I am SBI, go to another company because you will get the same cover at a lower rate? If I say this, I am an advisor. If I don't say it, my visiting card will still show me insurance advisor. How many people will say this? So, just because somebody calls himself or herself an advisor, doesn't mean that they are genuine advisors. We have got a lot of problems in the insurance industry. There are corporate brokerage houses. These are big institutions. They can sell policies of any company. So you think if I go to a corporate broker, they'll obtain quotations, give me the lowest policy. No, in practice it doesn't work. There will be certain insurance companies holding certain competitions at a given period of time. You get in so much of business, we will give you extra incentives. Immediately, slowly the corporate brokers, employees will be guiding people into only those companies where they get paid more. There are also targets placed on the employees, and all the targets are revenue maximization targets. Very few of us know that insurance insiders themselves have got a certain term for bad policies. They call them poor insurance, poor investment products. There is a very basic misunderstanding of the word insurance. Insurance means protection. There is a risk, you need protection. Risk that I may fall ill, medical insurance. There may be an earthquake, my newly built house or newly acquired flat may be flattened. There is property insurance. Vehicles, there is vehicle insurance. When it comes to life, we are not protecting against the loss of life. We are protecting against the absence of earnings caused by the loss of life. Nobody explains that. Because somebody was alive, somebody was working, somebody was able to generate a certain amount of income for his family, suddenly he is not there. That income is not there. Instead, the insurance company pays them a large lump sum. It is a compensation against not loss of life, but loss of earnings caused by loss of life. So, insurance means protection that is purchased. The purchase price is called a premium. The insurance company offers the protection. You have some valuable goods in your warehouse. You engage the services of a security agency. The security agency has certain security guards. Protection. You install a burglar alarm system. protection. This is insurance. Now what the insurance companies do is, they mix investment with insurance. Actual good policies like pure term policies are never sold, or people are actively discouraged from going there. They say, you will pay premium, you will get nothing back. What do you mean you will get nothing back? There was one particular agent who had come to the office with a client to persuade me to agree to persuade me that this policy that he is selling is good for the client. And he was selling a totally rotten endowment policy, very high cost policy where he would earn the maximum brokerage. So when I told him about a pure term policy, the agent said, but in a term policy, you are paying money every year and you are getting nothing back. I said, okay, let me ask you a couple of questions. So you are saying that in a term policy, we pay money every year, we get nothing. Yes. Your company has a term policy? Yes. So your company has some really rotten policy where you make people pay every year and you give them nothing back? No. Then what do you get? No, protection is given. What protection? Protection against loss of life. I said, but isn't that insurance? Isn't that insurance? Actually, insurance insiders themselves call these policies where investment and insurance is mixed. Their term for it is poor insurance, poor investment products. Neither are they good for insurance because you get a very low cover, nor are they good investments because many of these endowment and other policies, you are lucky if you get 4 to 5% of returns. There are all these problems with the insurance industry. There is something called the IRDAI certification. You have to pass an exam, you have to attend some classes, you have to study. It's of no use. It's of no use. This is just a certification. The moment the certification is over, you go for sales and product training, where you are only taught to sell, sell and sell. And sell what? Sell the most profitable policies that are profitable to the agent and the company. But these profits that are being generated, the profits are coming from whose pocket? You will find that it comes from the pocket of the insured. It is out of that money that the profits and the commissions are paid. Targets are, according to me, a malpractice, not just in the insurance industry, in the whole financial services industry. I always tell people there is only one target, and the ultimate and the only target is the poor chap who buys the insurance product or the investment product. That is the only target. You have to achieve so many policies. You have to give us so much of business. You have to achieve so much of premium collection. Otherwise, you will lose your job. You will lose your agency. Constant threats. So, at the back of my mind, my priority is not to give proper advice, although my visiting card says advisor. Not to give the proper advice, but to achieve the target. In the process, I make my customer the target. There are sales managers. Once again, not just in the insurance industry, everywhere else. And people inside financial services like us, we know what terms you use for these. Like I said, poor insurance, poor investment. This is called donkey driving. There's the first donkey, that's the agent. This donkey is go and sell, and sell crap. The crappier the product, the greater the profits, the greater the commissions. If you don't sell, terrible atrocities will be heaped upon you. You lose your agency, you lose your job. There are the team leaders, sales managers. They are the next set of donkeys because there's somebody above them also who is driving them. And it goes like this. The hierarchy of donkeys. Same thing with stockbrokers, same thing with mutual funds, same thing with large corporate distributors, same thing with banks who are now into core banking, selling all these things. especially some of the aggressive private banks. That's why people get harassed by telephone calls, telemarketing. It is so stupid. Somebody will be sometimes given a telephone directory, start from A, end with Z. You have to call keep on calling, keep on calling. Call 10 lakh people, maybe you'll get 1,000 bakras. This is the game that's being played. So there's a lot of mis-selling. Mis-selling takes place in different ways. First is pestering. Somebody will keep on pestering you to buy a policy. Until you buy the policy not because you want insurance, but to get rid of the pest. That is not insurance, that is pest control. The second is over-insuring, under-insuring. The moment somebody is gullible enough to take one policy, two policies, before long you'll suddenly end up with 10, 12 policies. I've come across somebody with more than 30 investment-linked insurance policies. In fact, the situation is so ridiculous. After a time, some maturing policy amounts are used to pay the premiums of the newer policies. It's one huge recycling plant. Pity selling. Somebody will rush to you and say, my deadline is 31st May. By 31st May, if I don't give them 12 policies or 12 lives, if I don't insure, I lose my agency. I've got 11. You are always the 12th. So out of some pity, you keep selling. There's a client of mine who's well educated in matters of investment. He once told me, I have to buy an insurance policy. Knowing his assets and all, I said, what's wrong with you? He says, no, my neighbor is not in good financial shape. So the person has taken an insurance agency and asking me for a policy. So I'm just taking this policy to help. I said, it's much better to give a gift of a certain amount of rupees than to take a lousy product. Give a gift, treat it as charity. Don't treat it as insurance. The two things are separate. Of course, there are also unreasonable restrictions. I understand that the IRDA is now toying with the idea of removing these restrictions, that a person can sell only the products of one company. These are unreasonable, and they are adding to this kind of mis-selling and the bad situation that we have in the insurance industry. The focus in insurance, once you become an agent, it is on product and sales training. It is never on financial planning, never on a proper assessment of insurance needs. Lot of people pervert insurance. I'll go after you, I'll keep on trying to sell an insurance policy. You'll be resisting. Finally, you'll say, okay, do you know the premium you pay is exempt from tax under section 80C? Take it at least for the tax saving. So now it is no longer insurance, now it becomes tax saving. A lot of people fall for that and they buy it. Rebating, of course, there are also the clients who demand a certain percentage of the commission that the agents get. They demand it back. That's an actual evil practice. Costs are never disclosed. That's why you have situations like what I told you about that lady. Paid 70,000, waited 80 years, getting 21,000 less. Not everything has taken place because the markets have fallen or something like that. Also because a huge amount of costs, and most of those costs went as profits for the company and as commissions to the agent. They are never disclosed in advance. In some ULIPs and others, they are now disclosed, but not in the traditional policies. Even today in endowment policies, money back policies, they are not disclosed. Let me tell you or give you insurance in one sweeping statement. If something is not a pure term life cover, it's a bad product. Endowment, money back, ULIP, pension, annuity, all bad products. Term insurance, good product. This is a simple conclusion. We keep hearing about this reform, that reform, but the insurance lobbies are very, very powerful, very powerful. There are a huge number of life insurance and other agents. So I'm afraid even if things are changing, they are changing so slowly we can hardly see any change. An author called Upton Sinclair, he said, "It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends upon not understanding it." It is not that the agents and the insurance company employees are ignorant that what they are selling is toxic. But their salary depends on it, their commissions, their earnings depend on it. So, all other things are swept aside. All other things are swept aside, and then you go into it. A student of mine, a very fine youngster, very ethical, he landed a job in one of the so-called leading private banks. But within 3 months, he was forced to sell bad products. And he's saying, nobody is bothered about financial planning, advising. They will take some of the worst products and say, you market only these. If he says, no, but these are bad for the client, there are better things in the same company, you market these. Why? On this particular product, there is a special incentive. There is extra brokerage. Now, all this special incentive, extra brokerage and all is paid. When you have to push a product, when do you have to push a product? When it is bad. If it's a good product, people will buy it. You have to push something hard, do some hard selling, only when it is a bad product. The American comedian Woody Allen says, there are worse things in life than death. Have you ever spent an evening with an insurance salesman? And this is my favorite, all-time favorite saying about insurance. Insurance is the business of protecting you against everything except the insurance agent.